With the formation of Air Command in 1975, the Air Force regained its sense of purpose and unity. All military air services would come under a single entity again, as an Air Force, in fact. It had a total of 897 aircraft of all types in its inventory, everything from Musketeers to Boeing 707s and Sea Kings. More than 300,000 hours were flown by Canadian Forces aircraft that year. In 1975, the CF-5s were committed to the protection of NATO's northwestern flank, Norway. To help achieve this, a third squadron, 419, was formed. A very useful development was the in-flight refueling system developed by Beech Aircraft. A CC-137 fitted with the probe and drogue system gave the notoriously short-legged fighter a fast transatlantic capability. No sooner had the Arrow been canceled and the Voodoos, Starfighters, and CF-5s ordered in its place than planning began to replace almost all of them with a new advanced fighter. In April 1981, the first CF-18 was handed over to the CF at a ceremony at Uplands. Designed to carry Sparrows and Sidewinders, a 20mm M61 six-barrel rotary cannon, and up to 17,000 pounds of ordnance, it was a formidable dual-purpose aircraft, well suited to Canada's unique flying conditions and operational roles.
It's rather like the situation between the two world wars when we acquired Siskins, so that we would keep the capability, whatever the threat, which is unknown. You can't forecast what aircraft are going to be used for. You have to have an aircraft that is adaptable to various kinds of roles to meet the unexpected crises that are thrust upon. And yes, I feel that it's necessary to have a multi-role aircraft, particularly in times of uncertainty when you don't know what the future is going to hold.
Female candidates selected for pilot training arrived at Portage-la Prairie in November 1979. All three went on to Moose Jaw and qualified on the Tutor, the first women to become military jet pilots in Canada. Search and rescue is always a 24/7 job. SAR became better organized in the 70s and 80s, and SARTECs and air crews enhanced their already glowing reputations for performing rescue missions with bravery and skill. Through the years, transport squadrons such as 436 and 437, based at Trenton, have performed innumerable humanitarian relief missions and resupplied Canadian and UN operations in various inhospitable parts of the world. The first of 18 brand new CP-140 Auroras, Canadianized versions of the Lockheed P-3 Orion Maritime Patrol aircraft, arrived at Greenwood, and 405 and 407 squadrons began to convert over from the Argus. It was the latest in a long line of post-war MPAs, starting with the ubiquitous Lancasters. 26 Arguses were consigned to the scrapyard, though several were saved for the museums, each aircraft having flown more than 15,000 hours, including the prototype. The CF-100 finally reached the end of its service life in 1981. While the airframe could have carried on indefinitely, Orenda no longer had the capability of rebuilding the engines. They were all flown to their very last hours. The Voodoos began to be ferried to Mountain View for disposal in 1982. The final flight of a starfighter in Canada occurred in October 1983, and in 1986, one Canadian Air Group's starfighters in Europe were replaced by CF-18s. It was a Thursday, the 2nd day of August 1990. The Iraqi forces of Saddam Hussein marched into Kuwait, the tiny but oil-rich Gulf state on Iraq's southern border. The Navy was called upon first. The task group's mission was clear: assist in deterring further Iraqi aggression by helping to impose economic sanctions. It arrived at Bahrain on September the 27th. Just a few days later, the ships embarked on their first operational patrol in the central area of the Arabian Gulf, monitoring and intercepting shipping inbound and outbound from Iraqi ports. By the end of hostilities, the task group had conducted nearly 1,900 interceptions and 22 boardings of suspect vessels. The night detection capabilities of the Sea Kings helped to account for this excellent record. Coincident with our ships arriving in the region, Canada sent a tactical fighter squadron to the Gulf to provide air cover. On October the 6th, the CF-18s of 409 Squadron took off from their base in Baden-Sollingen, Germany. A few hours later, they landed at a military airfield near Doha, the capital of Qatar, one of the small emirates on the western shore of the Gulf. This would be the Canadian Air Task Group's Middle East base for the duration of operations in the Gulf. The first combat air patrol was flown the next day, October the 7th. Tensions mounted through the fall. In mid-December, 409 Squadron handed over to 439 Squadron, which had flown out from Baden-Sollingen and departed for Germany. And a further 150 personnel from Cold Lake flew in via Bahrain to augment the Air Task Group. Early in January, the Chief of the Defense Staff ordered the deployment of 6 more CF-18s from 416 Lynx Squadron in Cold Lake to the Gulf, bringing the total number of fighters to 24 and creating the Desert Cats. At the same time, one of the CC-137 air tankers from 437 Squadron in Trenton was deployed. This allowed the fighters to increase their combat radius. It was also used to refuel Allied aircraft. Hostilities commenced early on the morning of January the 17th. Baghdad was hit hard by aircraft and Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from American battleships. Up to this point, the primary role of our fighters had been to conduct combat air patrols in the Central Gulf, providing air cover to the Canadian Naval Task Group. But on January the 23rd, this role was expanded to include sweep and escort missions in support of other elements of Allied air forces. It was the first time Canadian combat aircraft had flown operations over enemy territory since the Korean conflict. The last major commitment of Canadian forces came on February the 20th in support of the final act. Canadian CF-18s would join the aircraft of 9 other coalition air forces in carrying out ground attack missions. Once again, Air Transport Group scheduled the long flights from Germany, this time airlifting bombs.
It soon became clear that flying combat air patrol over the ships was of limited value in that there had been very little sea-air cooperation training between the Navy and the Air Force, in spite of the fact that we were unified forces. And the results of that operation were indecisive.
The conflict in the former Yugoslavia also provided ample opportunities for the Air Force to contribute to operations. For example, between 1992 and 1995, when the Multinational Peace Implementation Force was established, the Air Force deployed 2 CP-140 maritime patrol aircraft to the Mediterranean. Based alongside the aircraft of other NATO partners in Sigonella in Sicily, the 405 Squadron Auroras helped to enforce UN embargoes imposed against the belligerents, flying up to 10-hour sorties over the Straits of Otranto and the Adriatic. And Hercules humanitarian relief flights were made into Sarajevo, many of them under combat conditions. After the stabilization force took over from IFOR, flights continued directly between Trenton and Zagreb, the capital of Croatia, using 437 Squadron's newly acquired Airbuses, designated the CC-150 Polaris. Other operations followed. Somalia in '93, and Africa during the operation to help repatriate Rwandan refugees from the eastern Congo in the winter of 1996. And Griffins from 430 Squadron have conducted a wide variety of operational duties in Haiti as part of our peacekeeping force there. Closer to home, practically every type of aircraft in the Air Force came to the aid of Winnipeggers and Manitobans during the Great Red River Flood in the spring of 1997.